A record number of women were elected to Congress this month, so it may be hard to imagine that 100 years ago, most women weren't even allowed to vote. In her first novel, Park Lane, author Frances Osborne focuses on that explosive time in history when women fought for their voting rights. Good morning, Frances.
Good morning, Nora.
Let's talk about the book in just a minute, but first, we do see a very different Congress this year. We now have 20 women in the United States Senate and a lot of women in the House of Representatives, but still not doesn't match the U.S. population.
I know, it's a fantastic achievement that there are 20% now in the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi was totally right to congratulate that. But what was interesting is how she pointed out is that we need to go further.
Mm-hmm. And in your book called Park Lane, your first book, you go back to World War I. Tell us about that period.
Well, World War I was just a seminal moment of change for women's rights. Before the First World War, there was the women's suffrage campaign was really reaching its height. Mm-hmm. They were, in England, they were going to extremes. They were burning down buildings, chaining themselves to railings. One suffragette went and slashed a picture of Venus in the National Gallery as a sort of statement against how women were regarded. But when the war came, this was the real moment in which women came into their own, because the men went off to fight and the women stepped into men's jobs. And this was tremendously empowering for them. They were riding motorcycles, mm-hmm. driving ambulances at the front. Some were even going into the trenches for nursing care. Mm-hmm. And
you can say there was somewhat of a sexual revolution.
There was, and this was another which I feel is sexual revolutions are very emancipating for women. What happened was that the soldiers fighting in France it was so close they could get home to England to come on leave for a week or two. And the duty to remain a virgin until you got married became to be outweighed by the duty to give everything you had to the soldiers who came on leave. And at first there was a phenomenon of even respectable and virtuous women, it was said, were giving themselves to soldier after soldier, day after day.
And I didn't know that phrase, khaki fever.
Yes, it's a great phrase, isn't it? It's as though women were going mad for men in uniform, and they were going absolutely mad. It's said that this happened particularly at the first, when women weren't allowed to do the men's jobs, mm-hmm. and it was their way of joining in. You know, it was as good as they could get to their war effort.
I still think, though, when you look back and realize, especially in the United States, 1920, the 19th Amendment, women getting the right to vote, that now in 2012, that women still, while they've made great progress in terms of elected office, that we still have so few women in Congress. And of course, here in the United States, we've not had a female leader. You have had one in England.
Yes. I think, to tell the truth, I sometimes wonder what those suffragettes would think if they looked at us now, 100 years on. And, you know, I think they would feel that we should have come further. One of the things that's happened is I think we've become complacent as women. We forget that even to stay still, we need to keep paddling forward. And look what's happening in the Planned Parenthood debate. Women are beginning to lose their rights. And we've forgotten how hard women had to fight to create change. It didn't just happen of its own accord.
Mm-hmm. Well, women are more than the majority of the voting population in the United States, some 53% of the electorate. Some people say they decide the election. They're 50% of the workforce. Why isn't there more representation, do you think, in these political positions of power and even in business positions?
Well, I think it's that, you know, women find it much harder than men to make progress. There is still, I believe, a natural prejudice against women. A woman has to be twice as good as a man. In England, we tackled some of the problem in our parliament by having all women shortlists for various, you know, an area could only choose a woman. But the other thing in Europe, what they're doing now is talking in the corporate world by saying that you have to have 40% of the corporate board has to be a woman.
And in Norway, that is.
And in Norway, no, but the EU has just this week started saying that this is going to be a recommendation throughout the EU, throughout Europe, that by 2020 it should be 40% women on a board to be a publicly listed company.
There are quotas in in the European Union, as you point out, in some other places. I don't know whether the United States would ever do that or could do something like that, but it's interesting to see that Europe's doing that.
It is. I mean, the great question is do you believe in positive discrimination or not? Mm-hmm. And I think it's necessary, because I do think that women have to be twice as good as men to reach the same level, and you need that positive discrimination to equal out the opportunity.
Well, it's a great book. Park Lane comes, of course, as there's lots of interest in that period, of course, with Downton Abbey, and certainly as we watch these new women in the United States Congress. Frances Osborne, thank you so much.